Introduction. The quietest migrations are usually the ones that blindside entire markets, and SWIFT is orchestrating one of those shifts right now. The legacy financial plumbing that moves trillions of dollars every day is being ripped out and replaced by ISO 20022 and blockchain-anchored settlement rails. This isn't a project for the next decade, because the transition is happening right now. If you treat this as a simple back-office upgrade, you are going to miss the structural risks completely. What we are actually seeing is capital fleeing toward public ledgers and new liquidity structures that create a radically different counterparty landscape. This is not a tech refresh, but a total rewiring of how value moves across the globe. Risk 1. The liquidity exit you won't see until it's gone. Most people are missing the obvious shift happening beneath the surface, where trillions in collateral and treasury assets are being retokenized onto chains to move 24/7. That is not an upgrade to the existing plumbing, but an exit from the legacy settlement layer entirely. These types of exits do not come with a press release, and they usually show up as thinning order books or unexplained settlement cost spikes that risk committees cannot diagnose until the liquidity is already gone. BlackRock's BUIDL fund is live and processing, and JPMorgan's Onyx is also live and processing. These are not sandbox experiments running on a testnet with play money, but production infrastructure pulling real liquidity out of T+2 systems right now. Every dollar that settles on-chain is a dollar not parked in an escrow account earning 0 for 2 days, and the funds flowing through these rails are growing every single quarter. This is the real motivation for the pivot at SWIFT. The Chainlink interoperability trials are not about chasing crypto hype, but about survival. If SWIFT does not connect these new venues, banks will route around it completely, and the messaging monopoly that took 50 years to build becomes irrelevant overnight. SWIFT's leadership knows that better than anyone. Liquidity follows efficiency every single time. When institutions can earn yield intraday on-chain, the cost of keeping capital in traditional Nostro accounts turns punitive. You are paying an opportunity cost in basis points per hour, and when you multiply that across trillions in daily settlement volume, the old system's economics collapse under their own weight. The math simply stops working. The shift from exploring the technology to being fully live creates a risk trajectory that nobody has modeled yet. It shows up on the balance sheet as trapped capital you did not know was trapped, and by the time you see it, the efficient venues have already won. Risk 2. Counterparty risk will mutate, not disappear. Tokenization sells a very clean story about atomic settlement and the end of Herstatt risk. The pitch is that delivery versus payment gets baked directly into the protocol, which supposedly eliminates counterparty risk entirely. But that is not what is actually happening on the ground, because the risk is not disappearing. It is just being redistributed into corners of the system where most risk managers have not even started looking yet. Smart contract dependencies and validator concentration have become the new homes for these old risks. When a chain's validator set is controlled by a small handful of entities, settlement finality is no longer guaranteed by pure mathematics. It becomes a governance vote, where a few operators with enough stake can theoretically reorganize the chain and turn your atomic settlement into something probabilistic. The legal framework for who actually bears that loss simply does not exist yet. You have to connect this reality to the way SWIFT is pivoting right now. In the legacy model, SWIFT acts as a buffer that isolates banks from one another, so a failure at one institution stays contained within those specific walls. In the multi-chain world, SWIFT is currently building, a failure on one protocol can cascade through the entire interconnected messaging layer. SWIFT becomes the carrier rather than the firewall, and settlement contagion starts moving at the speed of a smart contract call. Think about a high-value bond repo on a permissioned chain that settles through a message routed via SWIFT's new translator to a public liquidity pool. You have to ask where exactly final settlement happens in that chain. Is it at the permissioned ledger, or does it happen at the translator node? If the system breaks at any point in that sequence, the lack of a clear legal anchor means the counterparty risk you thought you deleted is actually higher than ever. Risk 4. Security perimeter collapse. Your private key is the new SWIFT code. For 50 years, securing SWIFT meant locking down a bitcode and keeping physical terminals in guarded rooms. But that threat model is completely obsolete today. The new attack surface consists of private keys that can authorize irreversible settlement on public infrastructure. You do not need to breach a bank's physical SWIFT terminal anymore when you can just compromise the signing key sitting on an engineer's laptop. The 2016 Bangladesh bank heist showed us how bad things could get when attackers manipulated SWIFT messages to steal $81 million. Now you should imagine what happens if they compromise the private key that authorizes a bond issuance on a public ledger. The loss is no longer capped by correspondent banking limits because it is total, instant, and there is no recall button to press at 3 a.m. SWIFT's pivot actually makes this situation worse because their experiments reveal exactly where the new weak points live. The real danger is in the inter-network breaches where an attacker does not even need to crack Ethereum's consensus to win. They only need to find one misconfigured node in the translation layer between SWIFT's messaging and the settlement chain. That node holds the signing authority, making it the crown jewel that nobody is guarding with enough intensity. Most asset managers and custodians lack key management protocols for anything beyond basic cold storage. Cold storage does not help when the system needs to auto-sign tokenized commercial paper every few hours, which means automated signing requires hotkeys. Hotkeys create live exposure, and the security architecture used to protect a dormant Bitcoin wallet has nothing to say about rotating keys for continuous settlement flows. The threat vector is moving from message forgery to key compromise, and the damage is instant, irreversible, and public in ways no bank has ever had to manage. You can usually contain a SWIFT message breach with legal agreements and correspondent relationships. A drained smart contract gets inscribed on a block forever, and the entire market gets to watch it happen in real time. Risk 5. First mover advantage will redraw the map before you react. Infrastructure migrations follow a brutal pattern, where the first institutions to connect to the new rails set the standards and capture the network effects. These early movers dictate the fee structure, which means everyone else eventually shows up to a market that is already owned by someone else. This migration isn't some theoretical concept anymore, because we can see it happening in the core of the system. DTCC and Euroclear are currently building the settlement infrastructure for the next decade, while private chains are already running production volumes. SWIFT is linking these pieces together into one orchestration layer, proving that this is no longer a sandbox environment. We are watching the new settlement backbone get assembled in real time, while most institutions are still stuck in the phase of forming working groups. If you aren't inside the pilots right now, you will eventually enter a market where the dominant liquidity pools are already tokenized. Trading desks that waited will find themselves walled off from the best execution because the liquidity has moved to venues they simply cannot access natively. You lose your ability to negotiate when the counterparties you need have already settled on-chain and are posting yields you can't match from a standard T+2 account. The competitive pressure starts hitting even harder from the bottom of the market. Fintechs and blockchain-native institutions don't carry the heavy costs of layered messaging systems built in the 1970s, so they can offer settlement at a fraction of the price. Every basis point of messaging overhead that incumbents carry becomes a weight they can't shed fast enough. As margins compress, those legacy cost structures turn into a liability instead of a moat. SWIFT's pivot is the clearest signal that we have left the experimentation phase. Permissioned infrastructure and public chains are merging into a single settlement fabric, and the institutions that view this as a simple technology upgrade will wake up in a market they no longer control. By the time they realize it was a structural shift, the standards, the fees, and the relationships will already be locked in by the ones who moved first. Conclusion. Ignoring the blockchain integration at SWIFT isn't a strategy, but rather a bet that the world's largest financial messaging network will fail. It is also a bet that tokenized capital is just a passing trend, yet neither of those bets has any real evidence behind it. Every Treasury Department and asset manager needs to audit 3 specific things right now. You need to look at your T+2 settlement exposure, your counterparty assumptions across different chains, and your key management gaps. The infrastructure is already live, and the window to adapt is shrinking while the market rewires itself beneath the surface. This isn't a future risk you can push off until next quarter's planning session. Tell me which risk you think is most underestimated in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe for our next breakdown of the actual flows behind these numbers.